Hello, I'm John Parkin from the University of the West of England Centre for Transport and Society. This is the second in a series about surprising things you never knew about transport. I want to talk to you about two things. Firstly, accident rates and traffic volumes, and secondly, lane markings within carriageways. So firstly, accident rates and traffic volumes. But even before that, I'd like to introduce to you linear systems and non-linear systems. As humans, we typically think in a linear way. If we walk a mile and it takes 15 minutes, 2 miles will take us half an hour. However, there are many things in nature which are not linear, for example, compound interest. Let me introduce you to a French riddle. We have a lily pond, and the lilies grow on the pond exponentially. They double in size every day. So if left unchecked, the pond will be fully covered after 30 days. So we don't do anything about it for a while because the lilies don't seem to be growing. And we only worry when the lilies cover half of the pond. The question is, well, on what day would that be? Well, it turns out, of course, that it's on the day before Doomsday, the day when the pond is fully covered with lilies. So we can see here that perhaps there are parallels in nature. We don't perceive as humans some things that are perhaps going on exponentially. Accident rates are similar. Let's look at some accident rates. We have on the left a number of accidents of 3 and on the right a number of 5. We might instantly say that the risk is greater for the location on the right hand side. But of course we need to think about the exposure. So if we bring that into the equation, we might find that the exposure for the location on the right hand side is greater than for the left hand side. So what we do then is typically draw a line, and we might find that the gradient for the line is greater for the location on the left hand side. In this circumstance then, we might say that that junction is more dangerous, but we would be wrong, because typically as the volumes increase or the exposure increases, there is a non-linear relationship with the number of accidents as shown here. Smead studied this as long ago as 1949. On the left we see for Great Britain the relationship between the number of motor vehicles per head of population on the x-axis, and on the y-axis the number of deaths per head of population. And on the right-hand side we see the same data for the United States of America. We see there great non-linearity in the relationship. And Smead suggested that this was because people were becoming more used to dealing with motor traffic, and in fact we tend to deal with areas where there are high accident rates. So moving forward, is there a Smead's law for cycling? And this graph shows some aggregate data again, and the x-axis shows the journey to work mode share relative to the risk index for cycling. And again, the non-linearity is revealed. This suggests that overall, if we double the amount of cycling, the risk will only go up by about 32%. Ekman studied this in more detail to try to understand the causal mechanisms. He looked at junctions and found that when we have a bicycle flow of 50 bicycles per hour or more, the number of conflicts per bicycle was dramatically reduced. And he surmised that this was because a motorist would typically see a cyclist at the junction when the flow was greater than 50 or so. So there we have it, great non-linearity in terms of accidents and volumes of traffic. Let's move forward and look at the effect of lane markings in carriageways. We have seen lane markings since perhaps the beginning of the motor age, and they're extremely common now on our roads to manage traffic and to direct traffic to the most appropriate position. Cycle lanes are of course meant to do the same thing. We looked at cycle lane lines and their provision, and interestingly we found that on roads with 40-mile-an-hour speed limits and 50-mile-an-hour speed limits, where there was a cycle lane, motor traffic tended to pass cycle traffic closer than where there wasn't a cycle lane. And we surmise that this is because when the motor traffic and the cycle traffic are in the same lane, the motor traffic is making a deliberate overtaking manoeuvre, whereas when they are in separate lanes, then the motor traffic is paying less regard to whether or not there is cycle traffic that they are passing. We didn't find this for 20 mile an hour and 30 mile an hour roads, but what we did find was that when the centre line was removed, the passing distances were greater and also the passing speeds were less. So overall, this tends to show that lane markings aren't a panacea. We have to be very careful in determining whether or not we in fact use lane markings and how we use lane markings. So there we have two interesting things about transport. If you're interested in these and interested to know more, you may be interested in our master's programs in transport engineering and planning and transport planning here at the University of the West of England. Thank you for listening.